The Phantom might be the most underrated ship in all of Star Wars, and I think it's because everyone treats it like it's just part of the Ghost. It's not. The Phantom is a ship with two full lifetimes. Born underpowered, upgraded into something historically significant for the Rebellion, destroyed in Season 3, and then reborn as captured enemy hardware because the concept it represented was simply too valuable to abandon. That's a biography, not a prop swap, a biography. But before we get into those two lives, there's one mechanical detail that explains why the Phantom matters more than people realize, and it's the reason the Ghost is the most complete freighter in Star Wars, rather than just a good one. Wikipedia's entry for the Phantom puts it plainly. In addition to its duties as a fighter and shuttle, the laser cannons allowed it to be used as an aft-facing gun turret for the Ghost when docked in reverse. The official Star Wars Rebels social media page says it even more simply. The Phantom docks at the rear of the Ghost and can act as the ship's third gunner. Third gunner. One small ship, three roles. That compression of function into 11.63 meters of Corellian-engineered hull is what this whole story is about. Act 1. Phantom 1. The Phantom came off the Corellian Engineering Corporation line as a VCX series auxiliary starfighter, a short-range shuttle purpose-built to slot into the docking bay at the rear of a VCX 100 light freighter. Cost, 22,000 credits. The RPG sourcebook Dawn of Rebellion lists the stock configuration flat. Hyperdrive, none. Navicomputer, none. Without a hyperdrive, the Phantom couldn't jump to hyperspace independently. It could fly, it could fight, carrying a Time and Bach MS-2B twin laser cannon and a KX-4 dorsal laser turret. It could carry up to 8 passengers in its folding seat cargo configuration. But left to factory specs, it couldn't go anywhere the Ghost couldn't take it first. The gap was obvious and significant. The ship's most notable limitation was the one thing it absolutely couldn't do on its own. So at baseline, you have a tough little fighter that can dock with a freighter, armed enough to be useful, but completely range-bound by its mothership. That's the definition of an auxiliary vessel. The Age of Sail had a word for this kind of ship, a small craft carried by a larger vessel, used for scouting, ferrying crew, and short-range duty. They called it a pinnace. Wikipedia maintains a Star Wars canon entry for the pinnace as a ship classification, a fast, short-range starship that was carried aboard a larger vessel. The Phantom fits that definition exactly, even if it was never officially designated one. That baseline matters for what happened next. The Quarry modification. During the Ghost Crew's operations in the second year against the Empire, Hera Syndulla flew the Phantom, with Sabine Wren and Zeb Aurelios aboard, toward a remote planet called Shantipole. The mission? Contact a reclusive Mon Calamari engineer named Quarry, who had built a prototype heavy starfighter and was sitting on it alone while the Empire strangled rebel supply lines around Ibar. Shantipole had dangerous atmospheric conditions. The Phantom crash-landed on Quarry's landing pad. Quarry is a character whose very name carries a tribute. Named after Ralph McQuarrie, the concept artist responsible for much of the original Star Wars visual language, including the designs of Darth Vader, R2-D2, and the original TIE fighters. StarWars.com's databank describes him as a short, prideful Mon Calamari, a master engineer who created the Blade Wing, commonly known as the B-Wing. He worked on Shantipole in solitude, with no love of the Empire and little interest in outsiders. Hera convinced him to let Phoenix Squadron use his prototype. In the process of repairing the crash-damaged Phantom, Quarry did something the ship's designers never intended. He installed an aftermarket hyperdrive and an exterior astromech socket. Now the Phantom could jump to hyperspace, but only with an astromech aboard to operate the system. Chopper, as usual, got the job. There's a framing about this modification that needs correcting. The Phantom is sometimes described as serving as a hyperdrive ring for the B-Wing prototype, but that's not what happened, and the actual story is more interesting. A hyperdrive ring in Star Wars is a separate external device that attaches to a fighter and provides the hyperspace capability from outside the ship. What happened at Shantipole was different. Quarry's prototype, the Blade Wing, designated Prototype B6, built as part of Project Shantipole, had an experimental heavy weapons system. Testing it disabled the B-Wing's own integrated hyperdrive. The Blade Wing couldn't jump on its own. But the Phantom now could. So the Phantom towed the prototype through hyperspace to Ebar, where a rebel blockade run was already failing against an Imperial chokehold on the planet's food supply. Hera then climbed into the Blade Wing and broke the blockade herself, using the prototype's heavy armament to clear a path for the Ghost to airdrop relief supplies to the population below. The design became the template for every B-Wing in the Rebel Alliance fleet, and the Phantom was the ship that gave the prototype its first real combat deployment. Without Quarry's hyperdrive bolted onto that Corellian shuttle, the Blade Wing might have spent the war sitting on a landing pad on Shantipole. That's as close as a shuttle gets to changing history. The docking mechanic in full. Now is the right moment to slow down and actually explain the mechanic that makes the Ghost-Phantom combination unique, because the specifics are more satisfying than the summary. The Ghost, a modified VCX-100 at 43.9 meters long, has a slot between its two main engines at the rear of the ship, fitted with a magnetic clamp system. This slot was designed by Corellian Engineering Corporation specifically to dock a VCX series auxiliary starfighter. It's not an afterthought, and it's not a modification the Spectres added. The SW Combine database describes the VCX series auxiliary fighter as purposefully designed to function as a detachable module of the VCX-100. The two ships were meant to work together from the factory floor. When the Phantom docks tail first, rear-facing into that slot, its laser cannons point backward, directly covering the Ghost's most vulnerable arc. The Ghost's weapons include a 360-degree dorsal turret midships, a nose turret under the cockpit, and a rear-mounted laser cannon. That rear cannon is the Phantom. Docked in reverse, the Phantom's guns become the Ghost's aft armament. The Star Wars Rebels wiki confirms it directly. When docked within the Ghost, the Phantom's twin cannons could add significant firepower to the rear arc of the Ghost. The on-screen proof came before the series even premiered. A pre-series animated short called The Machine in the Ghost, 3 minutes of Hera, Kanan, and Chopper bickering during a TIE fighter pursuit, ends with Chopper getting fed up with contradicting orders and making his way to what the Wikipedia article specifically calls the Phantom's gun turret. From there, with the Phantom docked to the Ghost, Chopper destroys the last pursuing TIE fighter. That's the turret mechanic demonstrated on screen before the show's first episode aired. What this gives the Ghost is a third gun position covering the aft arc, the direction most pursuers approach from. The Millennium Falcon has quad laser cannon turrets, top and bottom. A formidable ship, but the Falcon doesn't have a Phantom. There's no equivalent auxiliary that docks, serves as a gunner station, and detaches to operate independently. The Ghost has all three in one system. The Phantom's Wikipedia entry makes the function explicit. In addition to its duties as a fighter and shuttle, its laser cannons allowed it to be used as an aft-facing gun turret for the Ghost when docked in reverse. 3 roles, 1 ship. That's a feature usually associated with much larger craft, capital ships, cruisers. The Ghost is a light freighter. The Phantom is what makes it possible. The docking orientation question. One detail that rewards mechanical curiosity. The Phantom didn't dock in only one direction. Wikipedia specifies the turret function applies when docked in reverse, tail first, guns pointing backward. That specific phrasing implies a second configuration, and the show depicts both. Forward docking, nose first, serves the standard transport and crew transfer role. When Kanan and Ezra needed to eject from the Ghost while in hyperspace, the Phantom in its standard forward docked position was the vehicle they used. Different orientation, different operational mode, same slot. The Ghost's hull accommodates both because Corellian engineering gave the VCX 100 port and starboard docking rings in addition to the rear auxiliary slot, confirmed in the Ghost's Wikipedia article. The rear engine slot is the Phantom's primary home. The docking rings handle other configurations. The VCX 100's design flexibility is part of why the Phantom concept worked so well across so many different mission profiles. Tail first equals turret mode. Nose first equals transport mode. The distinction is canonical, and it's embedded in how the show uses the ship across seasons 1 and 2. The end of Phantom 1. The Phantom's first life ended in Season 3 of Rebels, dated to 2 BBY, during a mission to Reclam Station, an Imperial salvage facility suspended inside the atmosphere of the planet Yarma. The operation went wrong. Wikipedia, the Star Wars Rebels fan wiki, and the Disney wiki all confirm the same fact. The Phantom was lost at Reclam Station. The Star Wars Rebels wiki confirms it was the ship's final canonical appearance, listed under Season 3's Steps into Shadow. The show's continuity tracked the loss carefully enough that a brief animation error 2 episodes later, where the Phantom appears briefly attached to the Ghost, was noticed by the fan community precisely because the ship's absence had been so clearly established. This was 2 BBY, the same period in which Maul, a Dathomirian Zabrak crime lord and former Sith, operating as one of the Ghost crew's most dangerous recurring antagonists in Seasons 2 and 3, was actively escalating his campaign against the Spectres. Wikipedia's timeline places Maul's capture of the entire Ghost crew as the very next major event following the Reclam Station mission. These events are sequentially linked. Whatever the exact circumstances of the Phantom's destruction inside that Imperial atmosphere facility, it happened at a moment when the crew's enemies were closing in from multiple directions simultaneously. An auxiliary fighter, a shuttle, a turret platform, the delivery vessel for the prototype that became the B-Wing. Gone. Act 2. Phantom 2. The Spectres didn't go looking for a smaller ship. They went looking for a ship that could fill the same role. That distinction is the entire argument of Act 2. When they found it, Kanan's instinct was clear. He didn't say they'd found a ship. He said they'd found a new Phantom. The word matters. The ship was a Sheathipede-class transport shuttle, manufactured by Hayor Chal Engineering Corporation, a Nemoidian design, built for the Confederacy of Independent Systems during the Clone Wars. The StarWars.com databank entry for Phantom 2 names it directly. A repurposed Nemoidian Sheathipede-class shuttle, the Phantom 2 is an auxiliary vessel nested in the hull of the Ghost freighter, used for short-range travel. The Spectres found it on the planet Agamar, where they'd gone looking for proton bombs for their fleet. What they found instead was something stranger, a separatist holdout. Battle droids still following their last orders from a war that had ended nearly 2 decades earlier, on a planet that had been at peace since before most of the Spectres were adults. Chopper found the shuttle while evading battle droids. He told Ezra. Ezra decided to steal it. When Imperial forces arrived to destroy both the rebels and the droids, both sides cooperated to escape, and the Ghost crew kept the shuttle. Kanan named it on the spot. The history embedded in that ship is substantial. Nemoidian-designed, Clone Wars-era separatist technology, captured from a holdout that had refused to acknowledge the war's end, now repurposed to serve a rebellion against the very empire that had replaced the Republic those battle droids once fought. The Phantom 2 arrived carrying 2 decades of someone else's forgotten conflict. Sabine Wren performed the modifications, hull reinforcements, port and starboard forward cannons. The Wikipedia entry on Phantom 2 confirms the outcome. The Phantom 2 was also modified to dock with the VCX 100 light freighter Ghost and served as the mothership's shuttle. A useful comparison. Phantom 1 and Phantom 2 are genuinely different ships, and the contrast tells you something about how much the crew valued the concept they were replicating. Phantom 1 was a Corellian design, built as a fighter shuttle hybrid from the ground up. It had no hyperdrive at factory. Quarry installed one at Shantypole, giving it a Class 2 primary with a Class 15 backup. Even after modification, it required chopper in the astromech socket to make the jump. Phantom 2, the sheathopede, came with a Class 1 hyperdrive installed at the factory, unlike the first ship, which had to have one bolted on. The replacement ship already had the capability the first ship had spent a full season acquiring. Beyond the hyperdrive, the combat comparison runs in the original's favor. Phantom 1 carried dedicated forward and dorsal weapons, demonstrated effective turret operation on screen, and served in active combat across 2 full seasons. Phantom 2 was built with forward cannons, and the Wikipedia entry specifically notes that while it could theoretically serve as the Ghost's rear gun, this was never observed in practice. The function was architecturally possible, it just never happened in the canonical record. What Phantom 2 did accomplish was carrying the Spectres through the rest of the war. Conquered Dawn, Cronist, the Battle of Adelon, and then beyond it. The ship appears in the live-action Ahsoka series, set years after the events of Rebels, docked to the Ghost on Corellia as Hera pursues a rogue Imperial transport. A Clone Wars-era Separatist shuttle, still flying, still filling the same slot. What the Ghost becomes without the Phantom. Pull the Phantom out of the equation entirely, and the Ghost is still a capable ship. Forward laser cannons, dorsal turret, hyperdrive, stealth systems. The Ghost's Wikipedia entry notes it carries enough forward firepower to destroy an Arquitens-class command cruiser. It earned its reputation across 4 seasons. But without the Phantom, the Ghost loses its rear arc coverage. The aft gun position goes cold. Any pursuing TIE fighter approaching from behind hits a ship with fewer guns on that angle. More significantly, the crew loses their independent secondary vehicle, the craft that lets them insert operators into a location without landing the Ghost, the craft that lets Hera detach and engage separately while the main ship does something else. The tactical flexibility that defines the Spectre Cell's operational style collapses without it. The Phantom is 22,000 credits of ship, making a light freighter perform above its class. The engineering logic is straightforward. A designed-in docking slot, a magnetic clamp, a purpose-built auxiliary, and a light freighter suddenly has a rear gun emplacement that a vessel 3 times its size would normally need to achieve. The Millennium Falcon carries no equivalent. The Falcon's cargo holds and modular systems are well documented, and none function as a docked auxiliary as turret. The Falcon doesn't have a Phantom. Full stop. The two-life biography. Step back and look at the full arc. Phantom 1 began as a short-range auxiliary shuttle with no hyperdrive, produced by Corellian Engineering Corporation for a role nobody particularly celebrated. It got a hyperdrive bolted on by a reclusive Mon Calamari master engineer on a storm-racked planet. It transported the prototype that became the B-Wing to its first real combat test. It functioned as a third gunner for the Ghost across Seasons 1, 2, and most of Season 3. Then it was lost at Reclam Station during a mission deep inside an Imperial atmosphere facility in 2 BBY. Phantom 2 began as a separatist shuttle that fought on the wrong side of a war that ended before most of the Spectres were adults. It sat on Agamar for nearly 2 decades, under battle droids running obsolete orders. It was stolen, modified by a Mandalorian artist turned Rebel demolitions expert, and assigned the same role the first ship had filled. It carried the crew through the rest of the war. It survived into live action years after the show ended. What connects them is the concept. The Spectres didn't replace the Phantom with something similar by accident. They found the closest available ship that could fill the same structural role, dockable, independent, capable of covering the Ghost's blind spot, and Kanan named it before they'd even left Agamar. Not The shuttle. The Phantom. The role was irreplaceable even when the ship wasn't. That's the distinction the show made without ever calling attention to it. The Ghost has a slot between its engines. That slot requires a specific kind of ship. When the first ship was gone, the crew found another. Different manufacturer, different era, different faction, and made it fit. The concept survived the ship. One last thought. For anyone who wants the lore classification, Wikipedia maintains a canon entry for the pinnace as a Star Wars ship type, defined as a fast, short-range starship that was carried aboard a larger vessel. Historically, the Age of Sail used the same word for a small craft carried by a warship for transport, scouting, and auxiliary duty. The Phantom fits both definitions down to the function. It's never officially designated one in canon, but if you wanted a single word that captures what the Phantom is and what it does, sailors were using it 400 years before Corellian Engineering Corporation existed. The Ghost without the Phantom is a good ship, one of the best in Star Wars. But the Ghost with the Phantom is complete. A light freighter that carries its own fighter, deploys it for independent operations, and reclaims it as a gunner station when the shooting starts. No other ship of comparable class in Star Wars does all three with a single auxiliary vessel. No other crew lost their auxiliary, found enemy hardware from a different war on a different planet, and rebuilt the exact same system from scratch. Because they understood that what they'd lost wasn't a ship, it was a capability. 2 ships, 1 concept, 1 legacy that ran from a crash landing on Shantipole to a holdout on Agamar to the skies over Corellia. That's the Phantom. Both of them. If you want more stories like this, ships, crew, mechanics, and the lore details that don't always make the highlight reels, subscribe. There's more where this came from.